Good evening. Call the meeting to order. I'd ask you to join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Roll call vote, please.
Grinberg.
Here.
Gary.
Here.
Pepcorn.
Here.
Strand.
Here.
Mahoney.
Here. Well, John, we're pleased you made it back from Florida. We were worried the nature would keep you away from here, but you
Thank you. And I had a long, arduous drive, but I got here.
Good. Engineering, construction season has begun and road improvement projects have started and will be started soon. These improvements come along with added congestion and delay. The engineering department and I want to thank everybody, public, for its continued patience as work continues to improve the city. Fortunately, the flood is over and we don't have as much congestion in the downtown, but we will have congestions in portions of Main Avenue, 52nd Avenue South, which are closed to traffic, but remember that the businesses are always accessible. To stay current on detour rights, business access, and all other project updates, visit fargostreets.com. And Jeremy Gordon loves phone calls, so if you have any ideas of what you want to say about some of the traffic, that'd be fine to call him. It's National Nurses Week, which celebrates the contributions and positive impact of millions of nurses working in the United States today. Fargo Cass Public Health is fortunate to have a wonderful nursing team who work each day to meet the needs of the community. And since my wife is a nurse too, I have to thank her for all the hard work she does, but I know our public health service does a great job with the community, so thank you, Desi. Library. The North Dakota State Park passes are available to check out at the library. This is kind of unusual service. A limited number of passes are available at all 3 library locations. The passes can be checked out for 1 week, and each pass provides daily vehicle access to any North Dakota State Park. Additional charges are given if you have to do camping. You are the responsible the pass holder. Police. We keep getting new officers all the time, Dave. It seems like you just keep bringing in new ones, but on May 13th, 8 new police officers will be sworn into the Fargo Police Department. They will be attending the Summer Academy in Bismarck, and upon graduation will report back to the Police Training Officer Program. Congratulations. Lieutenants and sergeants of field services are moving upstairs in the Border States Electric Station to allow for renovations in their current workspace, which will be expanded to allow for future growth of the Fargo Police Department as the city continues to grow. Street crimes, narcotics, and others will soon be moving to the 2nd floor of that building. Getting pretty excited, I take it, yeah? Public Works. Spring is here and the Forestry Department has started tree planting. Between now and the end of June, approximately 1,000 new street trees will be planted. Many of these are replacements for the ones we've lost with Dutch elm disease, and department's asked diversification program in preparation for the arrival of the emerald ash borer. In 1990, Public Works Director Dennis Wallaker, our former mayor, started an Adopt a Street program after the Northside Girl Scouts came to him looking for a service project. Their legacy continues as this spring, Public Works sent out contracts with 27 groups, the highest number to date. It is exciting to see how involved the youth have become in caring for our community. Contracted areas are cleaned up at least once a month from May through September, and that sure makes our streets look nice and the city look nice. The street department's webpage recognized all current Adopt a Street participants, and the city truly appreciates the efforts by every one of them for helping keep Fargo a beautiful place to live, work, visit, and play. Solid waste. What a big week for solid waste, huh, man? It's cleanup week in Fargo, West Fargo, Moorhead, Dilworth, and Clay County. The annual event cleans up our cities by giving residents an opportunity to dispose of furniture, appliances, brush, household garbage, and other large items for their garbage collection day at no charge. There are some rules on what you can throw away, so visit our cleanupweek.com if you want to see what you can throw away or not, but it's a great opportunity for our residents to have spring cleaning. With that, we'll start. Is there a motion to approve the order of agenda? Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Motion carried. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the April 22nd, 2019 regular meeting?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. And is there a motion to approve consent agenda items 1 through 27?
So moved.
Grinberg? Is there a second?
Second.
Pepcorn? A roll call vote, please.
Grinberg.
Aye.
Pepcorn.
Aye.
Gehrig.
Aye.
Strand.
Yes.
Mahoney.
Aye. Regular agenda, presentation project list on the Water Utility State Revolving Fund. Troy Hall to explain.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, this presentation will be very, very brief, but the state revolving loan is a federal program that we use to do projects in the water utility. And what this presentation does, it allows the state to check a box and allow us to award bids on projects and then get reimbursed for the project cost. But before I get into the project list, I'll just tell you that with the new loan we're taking out, it's budget neutral. So we paid off the 97 water treatment plant. We're picking up the loan on the new plant, and then we reduced the payment on a loan which we didn't use the capacity on. And with this new loan, it's budget neutral. So when you look at the total debt service, it's about the same as it was in about 2015 once we get done. So, and then this loan it's a $24 million loan, and we pooled several projects together just to keep the financing simple for us here. But from a project list standpoint, the new downtown water tower, we've already talked about that, so I won't touch any more on that. Drain 27 conveyance improvements, Bruce and Steve Burrian talked about that associated with Red River Valley Water Supply, so we don't need to talk any further about that. So the three I'm going to talk about are lime softening, water treatment plant ozone improvements, water treatment phase 2 improvements. Our plant is approaching, it's over 20 years old, so we're going to do some just fix-it projects in the water treatment plant. And then UV installation in the 97 water treatment plant. So if we look at ozone improvements, it's going to occur in 3 phases. We're going to do near-term improvements, and that has to do with improving employee safety and access to our ozone contactors. The other thing is there's some severe pipe corrosion in our ozone contactors. We're going to address that. And then the next phase will be intermediate improvements, and we'll look at ways to reduce or manage our treatment costs. That project should help us out a little bit there. And then the long-term ozone improvements, we'll look at ozone generation capacity, and then other improvements that'll benefit the water treatment plant. As far as phase 2 improvements, what we're doing there, we did a filter to waste project, which the Department of Health wanted us to do. So that construction's complete on that. We're looking at doing some work on our pre-treatment process and our softening process, which is basically just repainting and fixing some of the components that we need to wear parts that over 20 years of continuous use wearing out. And then the last one in that, it's high service pump station improvements. That's the pump station that pumps water into our water tower. So we're going to look at that, look at some electrical updates and address wear on pumps there. And then the last one I have, we're going to be, we did some source water monitoring a few years ago, and per EPA requirements, we have to get a little bit of additional credit for disinfection through our existing treatment plant, not the lime softening plant, not the membrane plant. So the lowest cost alternative there was to install in our existing building. We found a spot that we could do it there, so we'll be installing UV treatment, just UV light through the water, and that'll fulfill that disinfection requirement. But that's it. I know it's very brief, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. But just said it's just to fulfill a SRF.
Troy, the total amount of your loan is how much?
The total amount is $24 million. Yep.
Any questions of commissioners?
Just
Mr.
a couple
Pepcorn?
quick ones. So this is a low-interest loan from the state of North Dakota, and so this is a program that they did that we're taking advantage of, correct? Okay, and then one follow-up. Could you talk a little bit about, you did some reconfiguring of some of the lines, and I know you don't have a diagram with, but
Yep.
could you just talk a little bit about that and how much you saved? That's very impressive.
Well, we're just we're still assessing the cost, but we're we're feeding reverse osmosis water. Actually, customers have been getting that since late last September through the new plant. We haven't sent finished water out the new plant, but we're experiencing it's it's every month it appears we've saved money over past, and we're well into the six figures as far as cost savings and stuff. So pretty happy, really happy about that.
So what you presented in finance, you did a little pipe change, and what's happened to that is it's changed our cost and chemicals and such.
Correct.
And then the secondary thing, you said the taste is still wonderful, right?
Yeah, so that's one thing. It helps with the taste, and we've actually been monitoring that all through the flood and everything. So we've had a good spring as far as taste and odor compounds and stuff. So yeah. Because
usually in the spring you have some odor issues typically.
Usually, and we've been monitoring our source water. So there are times when, like for example, since we've been monitoring, there was a time when we would have considered switching to the Cheyenne River because of concern of taste and odor compounds. But since we had the data, it didn't show that. It showed the red was fine, so we kept on, or the Cheyenne was worse. So we're doing a lot of different things with the new technology and the new plant. So very excited about that.
Mr. Pepkard.
Just one more. So when the water is high like this, does that affect what you have to do and the taste and all that kind of stuff? Or can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So when the water's high, with the runoff, we typically it's dirtier, so there's a lot more sediment getting into the river. So it really affects the first part of our process called pre-treatment, and that's one of the items we were looking at here, just from a maintenance and painting and stuff. But the job of that process is really to take out that sediment and mud from the water and clean it up before it gets to the next processes. So that's one issue, is the sediment. The other thing is it's much softer water because it's diluted down with the runoff, and so we just get it's softer water, and so we just have to adjust our plant to put out the water we want to get. So,
Thank you.
Commissioner Gary, you want to make any comment?
No, they did a great job with this, and budget neutral was what I wanted everyone to take away from this, so I'll move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and second. Any other further discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Gehrig,
Yes.
Binberg.
Aye.
Pepcorn.
Aye.
Strand.
Yes.
Mahoney.
Yeah, aye. We're still a little bit before public hearings, so Jim Gilmore, I'll have you do item 30, please. Recommendations to purchase land under Island Park ramp and necessary budget increase for land and GTC renovation, and to close the C1 TIF district beginning in 2020 tax year. Jim Gilmore, explain.
The background on this is the TIF district, and in 2017 you made amendments to the plan and allowed the use of the money to purchase land under the Island Park ramp, make renovations to the Island Park ramp, and do restoration work on the ground transportation center. One of the kind of the sticking points, we had hoped to buy the land from the banks early. That did not happen, but now the banks have come forward with an appraisal that our assessor feels is acceptable. Our previous appraisal was $728,000. This is at $870, $20 a square foot. The last appraisal was a year and a half ago, so certainly I think some prices have gone up, and it's simply a different appraisal. So there's kind of three parts to this recommendation. First of all, to increase the budget for the land from $728,000 to $870,000. Secondly, to make other budget changes and use the other remaining money towards the GTC repairs. And third, this would actually close out the tax increment financing district after the 2019 tax year, which is kind of just started. And so in the year, a year from now, this would not be included on the TIF list. We actually have to end this because this remaining obligation of the land purchase is complete, and the state law only allows you to go 25 years unless you have an outstanding obligation. So once this obligation is closed, we can no longer request TIF money from the county.
Jim, do you have some slides for the public?
I do not.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay.
As far as, when this TIF ends, starting in the 2021 budget year, this will mean the Fargo School District would receive These numbers are approximate. Schools would receive another $143,000, city $47,000, county $44,000, and parks $25,000. So with the closeout of this TIF, that money would go to those general fund. So the recommended motion is before you to purchase the land. There could be one more budget change, just as the land purchase. I don't think we have title insurance and some other costs in there. So as these projects get closer, we may need to move money a little bit, but you know, just a few $1,000s here and there. So, do you have any questions?
Do you have a motion?
Mr. Mayor.
Commissioner Gehrig.
Jim, are we obliged to buy the land underneath the parking ramp? Do we have to?
Yes, it's in the agreement that we have to buy it in 2019. It was.
Thank you.
Move for approval.
Second.
Second, moved and second. Any other discussion? Commissioner Strand.
Thank you. Jim, just so I understand it better, why would the purchase price be the last thing determined rather than proactively upfront?
When we built the ramp, we had limited funds available, so the decision was made at that point to lease the land for 25 years at no cost and then pay whatever the market value was when we finished paying off the bonds for the construction of the ramp.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Grinberg.
Aye.
Pepcorn.
Aye.
Gehrig.
Yes.
Strand.
Yes.
Mahoney.
Aye. We'll go to public hearings. Item 29A, withdrawn, Bentley Place, First Edition, 5570 32nd Avenue South, zoning change denial recommended by Planning Commission on 4/2/19. There's, that item is withdrawn. What we'll do is Donald Kress wants to do item B and C since they're related, and we can vote on them each separately, but he'll present the data on it. And this is a zoning change in both of them, and I'll let Donald explain it. Thank you, Donald.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Commissioners. Donald Kress with the Department of Planning and Development. As the Mayor has stated, items 29B and 29C are similar projects, though they are in different locations. They request similar modifications to an existing conditional overlay, and staff and Planning Commission's recommendations on both items are similar. So, as the Mayor said, in the interest of brevity, I'll present both items to you on the locations, and then the recommendation, and then that would be a time to vote for you. So our first case is the Blue Water Creek 3rd Edition. This is here on 32nd Avenue South and 45th Street South. And again, there is an existing conditional overlay on this property. These conditional overlays include design guidelines for both the buildings and the site. And as we look at that with the zone change, that accompanies the LC limited commercial zoning there. And one of the guidelines in that conditional overlay prohibits off-premise advertising, that is billboards, on that site. The applicant is requesting to repeal and reestablish the conditional overlay in order to allow an off-premise sign. And here is a plat of the Blue Water Creek edition. And so again, here's 32nd, 45th. This is the approximate location of the proposed sign. The prohibition against off-premise signs was included in the original conditional overlay for this property in 2003 and has continued to the current conditional overlay despite other modifications that have been made to that original conditional overlay. And so the sign detail here, these images were provided by the applicant. This sign actually is oriented to read from 32nd. It sort of looks like you can read it from 45th there, but it's really oriented from 32nd here. And again, here's urban plains across the street here. That's just shows the height of 25 feet there. This would be a 300 square foot sign face with a height of 25 feet. It would have a digital sign facing east, that is east on 32nd, and a static side facing west along 32nd Avenue. Here is a photo simulation again. So here you're facing west along 32nd Avenue, and this would be the static side, and then the digital side would be on the other side. So this is proposed. This is about where it would be. That's the existing actual urban plains sign. There probably is not a stripe across the truck. That's something. So that's our first location, and that's location number 1. Location number 2 is the Timber Creek 8th Edition. Here we are on 52nd Avenue South, Timber Creek Parkway. The cash-wise is over here. Again, this area is zoned GC General Commercial. And again, this has a conditional overlay that the applicant wants to modify to remove the prohibition on off-premise signs. That one was again in the original conditional overlay and is continued in the current conditional overlay. So here we are down here, approximate location of the sign. We have some more photo simulations from the applicant here. Again, this is facing on 52nd. This would be a sign of 35 feet high. It's 35 feet. And it would have 2 digital sign faces, one facing each direction on 52nd Avenue. So here's, again, a simulation. Here's 52nd out here. And here we see the location. There's the Dairy Queen and our landmark there, and the approximate location of the sign there. So, Commissioners, these and a couple other cases which are not before you at this time were presented to the Planning Commission at the April 2nd Planning Commission hearing, and staff had recommended the denial of these requests, and the Planning Commission affirmed this recommendation of denial by a vote of 11-0. That is a unanimous vote to deny these signs. The basis for the denial is stated in the findings in your staff report. The proposed modifications would be opposed to the original intent of the conditional overlay. The City of Fargo has many conditional overlays along arterial roadways south of Interstate 29 that prohibit off-premise advertising. And there's a lot of billboards south of the city and then more toward the main avenue area, but there's a space in there where there isn't any off-premise advertising. As development along corridors in the southwest area of Fargo began, including the corridors of 45th Street South, 32nd and 52nd Avenue South, and Veterans Boulevard, many of these areas were intended for commercial or mixed-use development that were zoned with a conditional overlay that established design standards for the development, among other things, and also prohibited off-premise advertising. The intent of this prohibition along the corridors was to not replicate the many off-premise advertising billboards that are found on Main Avenue and University Drive South. Approving this application would establish a precedent of how these corridors will develop, and it is likely additional applications will be submitted to make similar requests, and so the Planning Department doesn't feel that approving these modifications to the conditional overlays to allow off-premise signs would be going along with the intent of those and keeping that look we want for those entryway corridors to the City of Fargo. The applicants, Nate Volmuth from Paces Lodging and Michael Dragozevich of Spotlight Media, are with us tonight and may wish to address the Commission. This is a recommendation for both items 29B and 29C, Commissioners. That is, accept the findings and recommendation of the Planning Commission and staff and hereby deny the zoning changes to repeal and reestablish the conditional overlays. Again, there's, the details of this are in your packets, and if you have any more questions, we can answer those for you. This concludes staff's presentation. Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you, Donald. Is there any President who wishes to speak to the Commissioners? Would the applicant like to speak to us?
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. Only if you have any questions for us. I'm actually filling in for Kyle Fryer, so I don't have all the background of it, but Mike's here, and he was at the Planning Commission meeting as well, so thank you.
Anybody else, President, who wishes to speak? None of the owners are here or anything like that? Okay. Okay, we close public hearing. What would the Commission like to do?
I'll make the motion
As stated?
as stated. Would you like me to read it? I can.
No, that's
otherwise.
okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Commissioner Strand.
Thank you, Mayor. Donald, I'm just curious about if we've, since 2011, had about 1.7 sign changes per year compared to what we propose or expect, why is this so far out of that acceptable range of variances compared to the previous sign changes over the years? What's the difference between this and them?
I'll start answering that question. I may call on our planning director to add into that because I wasn't here in 2011. But the idea is that as you see, what that statistic is intended to demonstrate, Commissioner, is that there are still places to put billboards, even if you don't put them on this stretch of I-29 and adjacent corridors. So those areas still develop billboards there. And again, it has to do with the intended look. You may be familiar with the idea of like the forest of signs, you'd see like back in the 70s when you'd go to interstate interchanges. And not that, the one billboard would be that, but it's the idea that that look of a lot of high-intensity advertising right along those corridors, demanding attention, is just not the look that was favored by those original conditional overlays. And, ma'am, do you have any more?
The Planning Commission had a long time. They took this up, John, probably took a year to year and a half for them to come back. They worked with the sign industry on this. And the decision made is rather than have along Main Avenue where we have a lot of billboards, and now we have digital billboards, they came up with some rules that they wanted to have. So that group worked very hard with the signage industry to get through that. So just as you see the signs, that would now be a change from what we've had in the past. And the planning department and the commission basically is reaffirming their previous work on this.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And we've had a couple of requests. Dave, we had one down there by 32nd, and we put one sign in. They had wanted two. But the commission has been pretty strong about not allowing. Did you want to make a comment, Dave?
So the sign committee, it was a 2-year thing, and the main thing we're trying to do is, if you drive there, it's noticeably different than other parts of the city, and so I think it's pleasant. But we did allow signage around Shields Arena just because they have events there. But other than that, we were very reluctant to have a whole lot of additional signage.
So that's kind of the background, and we haven't had a lot of requests. This is the first time we've had a request to have it on this corridor, so.
Yeah.
Any other discussion? Roll call vote.
Pepcorn?
Aye.
Grinberg?
Aye.
Gehrig?
No.
Strand?
Aye.
Mahoney?
Aye. Item D, zoning change for a single dwelling residential and agriculture to a public and institutional on the Fred Hagen addition, and a portion on platted northeast quarter, section 7, township 139 north, range 48 west. And approval recommended by Planning Commission. First reading of rezoning ordinance. Donald Kress to explain.
Thank you, Mayor. Commissioners, I believe you'll all recognize this location here as the area where the Dike East and Dike West is, the skate park. Across the street here is Island Park Playhouse. There's a City of Fargo lift station up here. Again, this area is zoned. The yellow would be SR2, single dwelling residential. The grayish blue there is agricultural. Again, here we see those uses again laid out there. Just for reference, this is Prairie St. John's. They are not part of this zone change, but that's just a reference point. And the dike that's there and the facilities here on the Dike East. So this is some people refer to it as a cleanup zone change. The applicants here are this Fargo Park District and the City of Fargo. The city owns this piece up here, and then the park owns these larger pieces. The SR is requesting a change from the existing SR2 and agricultural zoning to PI, public and institutional. The SR2 zoning is not appropriate for this location as due to its proximity to the river, it can't be developed with single dwelling residential uses. As the property is owned by the City of Fargo and the Fargo Park District, both governmental entities, the PI zoning is the appropriate one. Also added to this is a conditional overlay, a little different than the way we used that term earlier. But this conditional overlay restricts the land uses basically to the ones that are there. The public and institutional zone is used all over the city, and there's, it's possible to put a variety of things. For instance, like the city garage is in the PI zone, and you wouldn't probably want a big manufacturing thing right down there by the river. So again, it just restricts it to the uses that are there. Those are enumerated in your staff report. Parking, City of Fargo lift station, the skate park, the Dike East and West parks. Since there can only ever be limited development on this site, at least with the current status of the dike and the flood protection. Commissioners, just a historical note here. At one time, this part of Fargo was once part of Moorhead, and the river was altered in course in, Mr. Johnson, was it 1962 that we did that? Okay. And it was modified. And if that name Fred C. Hagen sounds familiar to you, Mr. Hagan is a former city commissioner, and there's a plaque commemorating his service to the city on the 3rd floor of the City Hall. So that ties that together. The applicants, the Fargo Park District and the City of Fargo, are here. Well, I guess the Park District is not here, but with us tonight, I don't believe we have any comments.
Does anyone present wishes to speak to this zoning change? Does anyone present wishes to speak? If not, we'll close the public hearing. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Greenberg.
Aye.
Strand.
Yes.
Pipcorn.
Aye.
Gehrig.
Yes.
Mahoney.
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you, Donald. Thank you for reminding us spring is coming, Donald, too. I like that green jacket. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I got it in Los Angeles on my recent trip there.
Ken Costin, recommendation to extend a loan with the Wells Fargo totaling $100 million for a 2-year period. Kent Costin to explain.
Yes, good evening, Commissioners. I'd like to tee this up and have John Shockley actually go through some of the detail of the terms and conditions of this renewal. This loan is for $100 million, and it's an extension of the loan we took out to provide diversion funding. And so I'll let John explain that. It's the same structure, essentially, for a 2-year renewal commitment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the Fargo City Commission. Before you have the extension of the Wells Fargo loan in a total principal amount of up to $100 million. Thus far, the city of Fargo has drawn $50,250,000, leaving approximately $49,750,000. Our relationship with Wells Fargo first started in 2016, where we undertook the first series of temporary financing loans with Wells Fargo. That was again renewed in 2017, and we're proposing to renew it for an additional 2-year period. The current interest rates will be a variable interest rate based upon the LIBOR interest rate. That is consistent with our prior loan documents. The interest rate is a little better than the last time around. It's about 2.39%. When we first started our relationship with Wells Fargo, the interest rate was around 0.7, but interest rates in the markets have risen, so we're still at a good interest rate. These sales tax, or these loans are based upon sales tax revenues. They're not general obligation of the city, so Wells Fargo only has the ability to collect sales taxes pledged for the project. They are temporary in nature. The intent would be once we have the project fully rolling and our finance plan finalized, at some point in the future, these would be rolled over into permanent obligations, either in the form of perhaps a WIFIA loan or some other type of debt obligation. I can certainly answer any questions that you might have, but it is a continuation of the past Wells Fargo loans.
Commissioners, anybody have a question? Mr. Strand.
Thank you. Mr. Shockley, when you say we roll it over into a more permanent type situation, could you explain that a little more? The loan would continue?
Well, there's a couple options. If we have the availability of WIFIA financing, we would borrow sufficient funds through WIFIA to pay off these temporary obligations, and then it would be a long-term WIFIA loan. The attractiveness of a WIFIA loan is the payments don't start until 5 years after substantial completion.
Excuse me, that say that again? That
WIFIA.
Spell that out for me, if you would.
WIFIA.
And what's that mean?
It is a Water Infrastructure Financing Investment Act.
Okay.
It is a program that EPA currently has that the Army Corps of Engineers is trying to implement at the federal level. If we're not able to get WIFIA loans, we would intend to roll those over into permanent sales tax bonds. The term, we would try to get the terms as long as possible to lower the annual debt service payment. But it'd probably, if we went to the traditional bond market, it'd either be a 20 or 25-year term on the bonds.
It's basically like a construction bridge loan, John. It's on now, but eventually as it gets finished, then we would flip it into a different type of bond payment.
Move for approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
I have a question, Mr. Mayor.
Yep, Commissioner Gehrig.
So when you're saying extending the loan, are you suggesting that if we don't extend the loan, then we don't have access to the $49 million?
Commissioner Gehrig, that is correct. If you do not extend the loan, you would not have access to the additional $49 million of temporary financing. Currently, you've only drawn down to $50 million, and if you did not extend the terms of the loan, then we would be looking to refinance the $50 million that's already been drawn.
So is this more like a line of credit?
That is correct. It's a temporary revolving line of credit through Wells Fargo. We can pay down principal portions of it and then call more. There is some flexibility for during the construction financing period in which if we had a year where we had an extra $30 million, we could pay down principal on the loan and then draw it down the next year. So there's flexibility built into the loan.
Why is there an end date to this line of credit?
The end date, just like any loan, they put in a term, an end term, so that the parties have to renegotiate at the end of that term. Just like we had this 2-year term that is expiring. Times change. 2 years is a long time in the financial world for a temporary obligation.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So initially, we took it as a 3-year loan, and then we knew we'd have to extend it as well. And then once you've done the P3 bid, and then we finally get our finances, that's where it may be addressed again, which probably, John, you anticipate in the next 2 years something might happen.
Correct. And maybe just briefly, over the next 60 to 90 days, we're going to be taking some time to analyze the financial plan from January 1st to May 1st, or the end of May, or May 1st of this year. We have increased the amount of funding available to the project by $480 million, which is a big success. $300 million from the federal side and $180 million from the state side. And then we're also currently, the Minnesota legislature is still in session. I received a brief update today that bill is still in progress. And it sounds like there was an approval on both the House side and the Senate side, but it's still subject to conference committee as the process goes through. So we won't know until the end of the session. So we're going to take those numbers back, work the financial plan, make the appropriate adjustments, and come up with a solution on how to get the P3 portion of the project bid out. We're estimating that'll take 60 to 90 days. Then we would anticipate recommencing the procurement on the P3 later this year with the intent of getting bids next year on the P3 portion and a notice to proceed with construction sometime in the later part of 2020. Those dates are we still have to work through those details, but that's a general overview of where we'll be at next year.
Thank you. Roll call vote, please.
Grinberg.
Aye.
Pepcorn.
Aye.
Gehrig.
Yes.
Strand.
Yes.
Mahoney.
Aye. Item 32, recommendation to receive and file the Civic Plaza Contextual Planning and Landscape Master Plan. Nicole Crutchfield to start it.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm pleased to introduce Scott Bishop with BLD Land Design. And in November 2018, we hired him to contract for professional services for contextual site programming services for the Fargo Civic Plaza. Tonight, there are 4 parts to his presentation, including the unique context to the geography, design opportunities, feedback from a public survey, and information about the Jimenez sculpture titled Sodbuster. We're excited that this marks the start of bringing together many moving parts that are surrounding this plaza area, a lot of things that have been in discussion in our community for a long time. Over the last 4 months, Scott's been doing extensive outreach with stakeholders as well as a public survey that he'll report on as well. There's a large breadth of this work that you'll see in a report that he just handed out, kind of fresh off the presses. So tonight's presentation will just be to highlight that work. He's got about a 15-minute presentation, and then we would like either your feedback tonight or for discussion, or we can bring this and have further discussions at future City Commission meetings. So I'd like to introduce Scott to walk through a presentation.
Thank you, Nicole, and good to see you all again, Mayor and Commission. I'm going to actually start at the beginning rather than the second slide here. So I'd like to, again, just to reiterate Nicole's comments, just give you a very kind of high-speed slideshow here to go through the work that we've done. It's been pretty extensive, so if you feel like we need to go back and look at one of these slides after the presentation, feel free to let me know, but I think if we could just make our way through this and then go from there, that would be fantastic. Initially, this work has come out of the Downtown in Focus work that we did actually starting several years back, and that's where we really saw the potential for the Civic Plaza to be a key and critical part of the downtown redevelopment. And we are in the process of building this vision. This vision is really about trying to understand how we conceive of a public plaza of this nature. It's a civic plaza. So we kind of come up with this little equation. It's about democracy, it's about ecology, and it's about program. And to us, that's what starts to form a civic plaza. But there's much more. It's about talking to the people that are part of this process. You can see we've talked to many folks in the city of Fargo. We've talked to several commissioners along the way. And we've talked to the Performing Arts Center Task Force, which I'll outline a little bit of the work that we've done there, the Plains Art Museum, NDSU, et cetera. And you can see in this particular slide that spatial relationship between all these people and the importance that they can bring to the table when we think about programming, as well as how we connect to each one of these entities. So we've been touching base since November and through April with all of these folks to understand how they can play a role in the formation of the areas surrounding to, feeding into, and the plaza itself. So we know that it's tied to a bit of history, right? We know that it's tied to the river. It's about what Fargo is historically, but it's also about how we understood the civic space. So going through this process, we want to make sure that what we're looking at out here is actually capable of being a civic plaza, and that has a lot to do with how we understand programming in terms of celebration, gathering, discourse, as well as understanding other precedents to make sure that of those precedents, we can understand the scale of this space and if it is appropriate. So we looked at a couple different spaces and we looked at their key and critical features. One was the National Mall, certainly a different scale. And sometimes we understand our scale by understanding that other scales are too big. So it's not a national mall, but it is a civic space like we've seen in Dallas. We look towards the things that are successful in these, in the future design of that plaza: programmatic flexibility, understanding programmatic seasonality like they do in the Boston Civic Plaza, and understanding civic expression like they do in Mexico City. Each one of these things looks towards a scale, and the thing that we did to prove out whether or not this was the right scale was to look at the populations that each one of those civic spaces would hold, as well as what this space can hold here in Fargo. And what we have found is that this space is actually to the scale. We can go up to 54,000 people can actually fit in this space. So it's not small, and it's a place where all of Fargo can come to gather. Ecology, as a human ecologist, but also, as we've talked before, is something that's very important to this city, and making the connections that are key and critical for the health of species and the planet. This, in terms of the relationship, many of us think about the northern tallgrass prairie, but in essence, this relationship is also about the riparian forest. This forest was what has helped to build Fargo over the years. There would not be a Fargo without a forest, they say. So in part, we understand that there are challenges in Fargo related to the river morphology and the ancient glacial lake that was once here. So we understand that some of those challenges are going to be part of how we manage the space. And we do that with living materials. So hybridizing really the river ecology, as well as the urban ecology and the plant ecology together, is how we start to think about the potential of this particular plaza: prairie, urban forest, and streetscape. All of these together actually bring the functionality and help us understand how we might manage stormwater, as well as give a unique place for people to be. So understanding this also leads us to understanding hybridized infrastructure, right? Things that are hard and things that are soft, and how they go together, and how we combine living and static things. We understand that writ large in the city is into how we manage stormwater. Water is an important resource, as we heard from before, as well as an important resource about how we manage locally. It's tied very much to the open space network that we talked about in the downtown Fargo. How is it that we can make sure that we have connectivity through living systems, as well as how we might manage this on the plaza itself? And so thinking about this more specifically, we can actually start to do calculations. We can understand how much water is actually generated in a year on each one of these hardscapes per se, and how much water we could collect even just from roofs and plazas to be utilized in this space. And what we might do with that is actually starting to think about, do we start to use it as irrigation? Do we start to use it as some sort of stormwater feature? Do we start to reuse it in buildings or in tree plantings? All of these are great potentials for us to understand how to reutilize this important resource. These things can occur as a hardscape or they can occur as a softscape, so we have a lot of opportunities as well to think about that. It's very important as part of this process is to understand the space and analyze the space. In essence, if we go and show you a bunch of pretty pictures and they're not true, when I come back later and tell you we can't build it, it's not a good thing for any of us. So we want to make sure that when we look at this space, we understand, yes, there's complexities and this is just an existing condition map, but in essence, if we look at it under all the jurisdictional overlays as well as the utilities, we understand this is a much more complex space, which has some of its own rules and regulations that we have to follow, both from a natural course, but also from a utility standpoint. So if we take that and we try to understand the context as well, what are the things that influence the space and how we use those in design? So we've done things like study how the shadows work throughout the year and throughout the day. Is there a warm spot? Where are the cool spots? Where are the windy spots, right? Where can we utilize the cooling action of the city when it's most necessary? You can see 2nd Ave as quite a windy corridor. I think you all know that, as well as how that fits into the larger imagined networks that we've worked so hard on in the downtown planning process. So we've taken a little bit closer look at some of that contextual planning because the success of this space is actually tied to its externalities, not just the things that happen on itself. So we've come up with this idea of the expanded network, really. How do these open spaces connect Broadway and how 2nd Ave makes its way to the Civic Plaza? This again is reiterating the work that we've done previously, but now we start to understand what might actually happen in some of these spaces and how we can reorient them specifically towards the uses of the plaza. So first of all, we consider how we make that connection, that key and critical connection, to the riverfront. This is something that we have lost since the flood wall has made its way in front of this space. So we've talked to staff, we've talked to Fargo Parks, we've talked to many folks that we've engaged with and how we might actually accomplish this. In fact, this was one of the goals of the diversion, to connect via a bridge. I think what we've tried to do is to give that a spatial quality and understand how that connection can be meaningful. So we looked at 3 options. We found out that none of those were right. So we came up with a 4th option, which is really this connection, this broad connection that allows us accessibility, but also that there's a secondary connection to Moorhead that we believe helps to unify the 2 banks of the Red River. It also connects to a larger expansive north and south network of space along the river, something that we would love to activate because it's so important and part of the identity of this place. So you can see once we kind of key those 2 things together, the expanded network and that riverfront open space, we actually activate much more of this continuous network that will help to build Fargo in the future, as well as what this might mean in a closer detail. How do we take those connections over the bridge and actually enhance people's understanding of the river, but also protect them from what can be a somewhat hostile environment along the bridge. 2nd Avenue also plays a key and critical role as we look to connect Block 9 to the Civic Plaza. What we've looked at were 2 options. One was a reduced roadway. Another one is actually looking at this as a shared use corridor, or as what we say with some of us with Dutch heritage, a woonerf. And that means that cars and people share space, and that may not be jointly at the same time, but it can be. But it allows us to close off portions of the street for events, and it also slows down traffic when it does share that space with pedestrians. We've also talked about putting in permanent kiosks to help to activate 2nd Avenue with its current facades being unable and unattainable for activation. These temporary kiosks work better than a hot dog stand where you can't actually get out of the weather if you're buying a hot dog, but in the wintertime you would be able to utilize these kiosks. We still allow access to the parking lot and garages, and we look for ways to enhance that later on. We can see that during events you can also fill in the teeth, so to speak, and make this a very large and activated space connecting from Block 9 all the way to the plaza. This proposed axon shows the type of activation and the types of elements that would be in this particular space and how we would see that connection occurring. The kiosks themselves, as I had said, are small, they're micro retail, and they allow people to start businesses and then grow them into other larger spaces. Again, being conditioned, it allows folks to get out of the weather, whether it be rain or sleet, hail, or snow. Like today, it's fine just to be outside, which is nice. So these kiosks actually help to activate that street and bring folks together. Briefly on 4th Street, the real goal that we have here is, first of all, to calm traffic down and bring that plaza slightly out into the road profile. This allows us to do some of the enhancements that we talked about in the downtown plan, capturing stormwater off that road and bringing it onto the plaza as an element or as irrigation. So the contextual planning outcomes really create this kind of expanded network, which we talked about, and we can see how it activates all of the development that potentially surrounds this plaza. That's where the true value of the plaza is, not only for civic enhancement, but also to enhance and increase development in the core. Some of you may have remembered my presentations for the Performing Arts Center at the task force meeting. We believe that you guys have kind of winnowed down to one particular scenario. We presented 3. One was the Civic Center site, one was the southeast corner of the plaza, and the third was the Mid-America Steel site. And so in looking at each one of those, we believe that you selected the Civic Center site. And so we are showing that even that also allows for some further study because we have the Performing Arts Center going and replacing the current Civic Center. The fact is that we could keep that all plaza. We could actually look at some mixed-use development in the southeast corner, or there may be even higher-use hotelier options for that particular site. So we are still considering what that might mean for the plaza, but it is a way to think about how we actually modify this space. The nice thing about this particular option, and we went through really a deliberation to show the strengths and weaknesses of each of those 3 sites, is its true connection to the Skywalk as well as the connection to 2nd Avenue. And so you can see in this particular slide how we rated that particular, this particular option, which site suitability is great, as well as future development potential, and costs are much less than what we would find in something like an option C at the Mid-America Steel site, as well as the timeline for development. So this is particular interest for us in terms of the work that we've done post the community engagement. So much of this work was out in public. Some of you may have seen it in some locations. Certainly we talked to the press about it, as well as given a presentation to the general public. We posted boards at the 3 libraries, each one of those talking about the process that we were going through to understand contextual planning as well as analysis. And we went out into the press to make sure that we could get some responses from the public input survey that we put out there. I don't know which one of you have taken that particular survey, but it seems like many folks did, as we had nearly 500 responses in only 2 weeks. So I want to just briefly walk through what those responses are. One thing to take a look at is the demographic, which actually reflects quite accurately the folks that are in Fargo. So we have a cluster in the 18 to 35, as well as a cluster in the 36 to 60 range. The interesting thing for us is the respondents and the people that are interested in the Civic Plaza we're seeing a lot of responses from the core neighborhood. That's actually really good if you want to make a successful civic plaza, because they're your adjacent users. And to further that strength is the fact that those people utilize the downtown for work and for pleasure. So understanding really how often people are down here, right? What we're trying to make sure is that this can be a success. And so by looking at how often folks are down here, we do see that there is a lot of opportunity for people to utilize a space like this. Nearly 8/10 or 80% of people are either downtown multiple times a week or every day. Looking at transportation, we can see that many people still drive, but this is an opportunity for us to think about how we program that plaza and integrate transit. We also had one person that responded that they took a dinosaur to work, so that's why you see that. Okay, no laughing on that one. Okay, so the other thing is really understanding what people attend and what they think are great events currently. So you can see that by scale of the lettering, and that follows a lot of the different responses that we have. So understanding that people are really into the events. We talked a lot about Fargo being an event city, and plazas certainly support events at a variety of scales, and especially those at large scales. So street fair and farmers market are big responses, as well as NDSU events and even the St. Patrick's Day parade. What we did see is that not very many people are accessing the river, so that exemplifies our need to make that key and critical connection in this work, right? We want to make sure that we allow folks to really take advantage of that resource that you have. Also, we try to understand character. This helps us out when we get into the actual design process. What do people feel that Fargo is? What do they believe the character to be? And many folks believe that the downtown, as well as the river, were the predominant shapes of what the character of Fargo is, as well as winter for that matter, which reminds us of how we need to make this plaza four-season active, right? I couldn't ask for better results in terms of what they believe a civic plaza should be, right? A venue for public events, of course, vegetated green space, public park, and a community gathering place. These are all the things that make civic spaces great. We were also curious as to how people felt about hardscape versus softscape or a mixed environment. In fact, most people believe that we could somehow find a mixed environment of both hardscape and softscape. There was a little tilt towards more softscape than hardscape. We believe we can accomplish this because it allows us to create program in very high program dense areas that might be hardscape, but still have contemplative green spaces as part of this. It is a fairly large space compared to the Block 9 Plaza, if you would see that space. So as well, trying to understand the materiality and other approaches that might define the design in terms of material. And what we have found, interestingly, is that people are very attached to the idea that this space would have water within it, as well as making sure that we have lasting materials like stone and brick, although making sure that we have warm materials like wood and that the space is well lit and that lighting is key and critical to the identity of the space. And we will see that in some of the other responses, including this one, is the things that they want Fargo Civic Plaza to have. Outdoor seating, performance areas, public restrooms came up, as well as you can see sculptures, and these are all scaled to reflect their interest. Winter garden also was quite high, and we understand that given the idea that this space should be active 4 seasons. So in essence, when we look at the ecological components, we see that they've reflected what we believe that to be in our initial analysis. So supporting that urban forest initiative, making sure that we have native plants, as well as the idea of having water features and fountains, and contemplative places like lawns, but also interest like sculptures and art installations. Community engagement also suggests that the activities are those that are consistent with those in civic plazas, marches, public markets, civic engagements and rallies, concerts and performances. This is a space that can hold those types of things, and we believe that these are the needs as well as this key and critical idea that a civic space is part of the democratic dialogue. And we wanted to see how people felt about the free speech accommodation in the space. And a high majority says that it's one of the most critical, important things about this space. So understanding how we deal with that aspect is critical to its success as well. Pedestrian friendly, a place for families. These are things that we hear consistently in Fargo, and we believe them to be part of its identity as well. And welcoming to all, and things that we believe we can achieve as we continue on with the design. We look at ways to analyze not just bulk data in these surveys, but we can actually kind of create characters and understand how they might each utilize this particular space. So that's just a design tool that I'm making you guys aware of. As well, we can cross-cut data to make sure that we understand. This one is in particular looking at the question of the character. So although we know that the people in downtown like the downtown, we wanted to make sure that those that were not in the downtown also like the downtown, and we had confirmed that with this particular data. Out of all the questions, half of the respondents in all other neighborhoods still felt like the character of Fargo was downtown. You'll see in your booklet that we have other comments that people have made that we thought were of interest, and these are specific comments that people added to the survey question. So what do we really know? The relationship and the connectivity of the river is critical. Core neighborhoods are very engaged, and they're the likely users of this plaza, which is great because you have high density and you have people that are more likely to use that for all 4 seasons. In that, you have a captive audience that is keen for events. The idea that we have some sort of water and light integrated in the space, and that we try to make sure that it's part of a transportation agenda. People believe that the integration with the library was very critical, and that it's a place for free speech as well as native ecologies. So that really starts to wrap up our work, but there's a key and critical component to this plaza, which is the installation of the sodbuster sculpture, which is actually something that we need to think about in very short term. So Sodbuster, just a quick, since Sodbuster hasn't been around for a while, I just wanted to make sure that everyone was up to speed on that, is a sculpture by Luis Jimenez. This is Jimenez's first public commission. It's a fairly large sculpture at 24 feet. It's heavy, and it has a value of about $500,000 estimated. The true value of this is actually in its cultural identity. So it's actually key and critical. You see it on your postcards. You actually have beer that's named after this particular sculpture. This is something that is very important to Fargo as an icon. Jimenez also has had a career that unfortunately was shorter, but it was very successful in terms of how he created sculptures for various cities. You can see he created sculptures for Denver, Albuquerque, and Wichita. He also, you can see versions of Sodbuster at the Met on display as study works that he did before he implemented this key and critical work. So we understand this to be an important piece of Jimenez, but an important piece of sculpture for the city. Where has Sodbuster gone, you may ask? Sodbuster, because of 20 years of heat and cold, snow and rain, the things that happen in Fargo, but also some of its placement next to a nearby train and traffic has put it in some damage as well as its structural integrity. So this sculpture was actually put into conservation via a grant, and that work has taken place over the past 2 years, I believe. That work is now 3 years. That work is now complete. And that sculpture is ready to be placed within the Civic Plaza. Of course, there's the hitch, right? This just speaks a little bit about the timeline. It was commissioned, of course, by the city. Eventually, the ownership went to the museum, and this key grant to basically fix Sodbuster is part of one of the things that makes it very important that we look to find a way to put this key and critical work in the Civic Plaza space. The planned installation based upon the grant was in 2019. So there are considerations to this, and just to be clear, we want to honor that particular commitment of the grant because those types of granting agencies are the types of things that are key and critical to institutions that are part of your civic nature here. So what we need to consider, we can't just plop that thing down and hope that it's in the right place, right? We actually need to start to formulate a plan for how we do this. So the location is critical. As you know, the previous location was part of its detriment. We want to make sure that that's not going to be an issue. There's a portion of landscape design that goes with this particular piece because it needs to be set in a particular context as a sod buster. We need to make sure we maintain that as well as provide security for that sculpture, and we can use security cameras and other mechanisms. We want to make sure that sculpture is lit, that's protected from the harsh sun and shade that was in its previous environment, and that we can maintain it over time. Signage, interpretation, et cetera, are all part of how people can start to interpret this key and critical work. As well, we need to understand what some of the wishes were of the artist since his passing. That interpretation comes by his spouse, Susan Jimenez. As any work that I will create in my life, it will always be ADA accessible. As well, we want to make sure that wherever we place it isn't over any key and critical utilities that might create this piece to have to be relocated once again. So our goal is to honor that. That goal is related to a time frame of an installation by, I believe, late September. So how do we get to where we're going from there? So there is a lot of work that we outlined here. Some of it's in relationship to the plaza. Some of it's related to sod buster itself. Our goal is to really think about how we now create a vision for the plaza itself, but also how is it that we actually get sod buster in on time. And at that point, I'm open for any questions. We can go back to the beginning if you want, or anywhere else.
Thank you very much. Good presentation. So this is part of the reason we're discussing this tonight is sodbuster's coming back, and as a commission, we have to decide whether to go ahead. And the first part of the plaza development would actually be place the sodbuster. The other elements are all broken up on how we have to do those types of things, but this is kind of a question to the commission. So I open it for discussion. Comments? Commissioner Pepcorn?
Go ahead.
I don't know, I mean, go ahead. I'm just going to say, I mean, a great presentation, and, you know, there's a lot of potential development and a lot of work's got into this, so it looks, you know, like a wonderful set of options to move forward. As far as sodbuster goes, we don't have many options, right? Because you don't want to put that in any of the area that's not developed yet, because then it's going to have to be moved again, right? So are we somewhat limited to options here?
Well, and that's, I think, part of the next steps, which is for us to conceive of the plaza in a way that we know that we've placed sodbuster in the right spot. So there is a bit of co-development that I believe needs to take place. So there's a concept design for really the plot, what we might say the plaza and the bridge and the potential development area, so that we know we aren't going to interfere with how we set sodbuster. And at the same time, we'll be developing an idea about how that sodbuster landscape works, so that when we set aside the rest of the plaza, or come up with these great visions and ideas, which we hope to work with you all on, that we understand that sodbuster can move forward and it is in the right location.
Can I ask a couple questions? So it's very exciting, but there's a lot of challenges because some of those are conflicting what people are looking for. You know, like public seating, I do think that's super important, and having softscape, but then you were talking about Mexico City, that's all hardscape, isn't it? And so to me, it's a very challenging thing. And the one question I had about sodbuster is, I mean, you have to have it out of the sun, otherwise it starts, so how are you gonna do that? To me, that's a challenge.
The restoration work has definitely added a level of protection that was not on the original work, but also we understand it still is an outdoor sculpture. We don't have to place a structure over it or anything. We don't have to put suntan lotion on it. It's just that if it's out in the middle of a parking lot where it's fully exposed all times of the day, that's really a much harsher environment than when it's on a plaza set back with some softscape and even potentially some trees and buildings protecting that. If you went back to the shade study, and I can go and do that if you want, or you can flip to it in your book, but you'll see that this is actually quite a shady spot. So, part of what you see there is our best guess at where we think it should go. I mean, I think that we've kind of zoned in on what is a hot spot for where it should go, but we want to make sure that we can set grades and elevations consistently with the plaza and with Sodbuster so that this isn't at a disjunct. And then we can continue with the larger work at hand after we've figured that out and achieve the goal in terms of the timeline.
I think what he's referring to, where the Sodbuster was before, was truly totally exposed.
That's right.
It's just a horrible place.
Can I just add a couple of quick things? So it's very exciting, and I think the other good thing is, I mean, we can start on this plaza now because we kind of know the lay of the land.
That's
you
right.
kind of know where the city hall and the library, those are fixed, and so even the potential buildings, you kind of know their elevation. So can you talk a little bit about that? That really we can do things now, and basically it's set.
Yeah, and that was one of the things we had. I mean, we had a lot more questions before we started this process and trying to figure out, okay, well, where would the Performing Arts Center go? Is it even going to be here? So as we funnel down to make decisions, we said, okay, now we know that the Performing Arts Center would at least be on the plaza. Now we know that it's more than likely going to be where the Civic Center is. And all of those help us understand, okay, this basically is going to maintain its elevation, right? So as we look at Fourth, which is another reason why Sodbuster is there, we understand that the change in grade for the plaza is least likely to happen along Fourth. As we get closer to the bridge and the potential development, that changes dramatically. If you look at where we are in this building, how high up we are from anywhere, that's likely the elevation of the plaza, because we want to make the connections to all of the buildings. So that means that we can understand, okay, if we've got to get over a bridge and we got to keep it ADA accessible, those all start to fix elevations within a range. And that also helps us understand how a development might actually key into that site and both have kind of a street front, but also a plaza level. So I think it is very exciting in that we can actually know a lot more about that potential development site if that's where we choose to do. I mean, we could also choose within the next kind of steps that stays open space. That's one of the things that I'm very interested in trying to understand, especially from you all, but also getting feedback as we move step by step.
Mr. Strand.
Thank you. Scott, I'm just curious, and I see Andy Mouse in the audience from the Plains Art Museum. While the Sodbuster Jimenez art is designed to be out in the public or out and exposed to the elements, is that the best choice? Andy, I wouldn't mind hearing from you on that, because of my intuition tells me I protect it, even though, for the longer haul.
I think that's the artist's request, John, but Andy will explain it to you.
Thank you for your question. It was, Sodbuster was Jimenez's first public commission. Part of the reason that it experienced some deterioration was that it was his first public commission. All of the errors, trial and error that an artist that puts into their work has been corrected by McKay Lodge, Conservation, who's doing the work. So we're confident that it can exist in its natural state outdoors as the artist intended.
Thank you. A question I'd like to ask, that's the elephant in the middle of the room, is what are we going to do with the 10 Commandments?
I mean, that's yet to be determined. I think that's actually part of the next process because it is a design element. I'm not here to answer that question. It's actually the public's question.
Has it been part of the dialogue up until this point?
I mean, people certainly mention it, and I'm curious as to what actually the general public feels about that. Maybe it's something you'd like to put to a general vote as to what fate may be.
We do need to make that a discussion point. We can't dance around that.
I agree,
Pretend
100%.
it doesn't exist. And I know where I think it should go, but that's not my choice entirely.
But John, if you mention it today, we'll have a full house next meeting we have together. So.
That's okay. I'd like to hear what people think, and knowing especially, though, they might as well know we're going to have a conversation about what's the best place for it in the future, and that will happen, so.
There was an action by the commission, which I know you don't know about, Scott, but there is an action that we did have at one time on that particular aspect, and maybe Eric can bring it back up and we can look at the rules behind it. So to carry that discussion first. Eric, do you want to comment on it?
Yeah, there's an ordinance in place that actually says any monument that's been in place in the city for 40 years or longer is to remain in the same place. So that ordinance was drafted as part of the last sort of controversy surrounding the Ten Commandments monument. So that would have to be part of the conversation, that ordinance. Yep.
Any other discussion? Nicole, is there any action tonight, or is this just a report?
No, tonight is just a report. Obviously, there's a lot of moving parts, and so before we got too far ahead, we wanted to make sure you're part of that conversation. The public was aware of this conversation. I think moving ahead would be, we'll probably come back in front of you with suggestions on technical documents for placing sodbuster, and then as Scott was talking about, understanding that conceptual design that goes in part place with the placing of sodbuster. So for tonight is just discussion. This is great dialogue and really helpful for staff.
And Andy, from your perspective, we're supposed to have it placed this fall. Is that correct?
Yeah, the original timeline was actually last fall, but knowing that the construction experienced some delays, and looking at that, we applied for a one-year extension from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. So the current timeline is this year, this calendar year. Our hope is before the snow flies, so we can better celebrate it.
Yes. Commissioner Peppercorn.
So can I ask Scott, so is your plan to come back to us with just that area for the sodbuster, that recommendation next? Is that and then I guess the other thing is for budgeting. I mean, that's the other thing. And then to me, there's such a list of things to incorporate. How are you gonna, that seems very challenging. How will that go?
So that's one of the reasons why I'd like to combine the conceptual plaza design and the bridge design with the sodbuster design so that everything's coordinated. It'd be really unfortunate, again, to design these things in a bubble. They're obviously in the same space. So that's what I hope to do. I think the idea that we would take a couple of steps and make sure that those things are actually synced up, and then we may come back to you and suggest, like, this is what we believe the budget to be. Like, it's kind of a two-step process, I believe. And this is something that we still, I think, need to really key in on, but my sense is that we would tie those two concept designs together because they're the same thing. And then we look to a next step that would talk about the budget, the execution, and the timeline, and that's tied more specifically to the technical documentation and execution.
Just one more thing. So we've flown out of the Denver airport quite a few times, and it's a Bronco, obviously, because you're in Denver. But I mean, that's the iconic piece at the airport, and I had no idea that it was the same artist that did both. And so it changed my view already. So I appreciate it. But I do think we have to have a commitment, especially when we've got an extension. Our goal should try to get something resolved this year for sure, especially for that piece.
Yeah, so I can do that. I again just like to reiterate that tying it all together in one concept is key and critical to success.
Can I just add one more thing? I do think our public library is right there. We should have a little bit more explanation about how special. I mean, that's his first piece. That's first of all, that's pretty cool. But to have a storytelling about that it's a great opportunity, because I think it's a very valuable piece of art at this point. So I think it's awesome. Thanks.
Mr. Strand.
Thank you. And Mayor and Scott, did I hear this correctly, that the city of Fargo purchased that art? You know, that's something to really note. And it's so many people who think the government has no business in art. This is placemaking, and this is investment into a future, and this is culture enhancement. And we should go back and commend those city leaders back then and say thank you for giving us an example of how to do this, and that it can be wise and prudent and can create a better future. Because I thought it was the Plains Art Museum. I wouldn't have known that it was the city that did this, and I'm
It was
just
the
even,
city.
that's terrific. We need more of that. We need a whole plaza and city full of art, but this is a good start.
Very good. Any other business for the commission? John, you don't have any birthdays or anything you have to
Not
talk
yet,
about?
no.
Okay, no other business? Is there a motion to adjourn?
I so move.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you.